How did a minor tribe become a superpower that terrified Europe and ruled the Middle East for centuries? This series covers the Ottoman Empire from 1299 origins to 1922 collapse. Give it a like, subscribe to follow along, share so more people discover it. Chapter 1. The Origins and Rise of the Ottoman State, circa 1299 to 1453. The historical context: Anatolia in the late 13th century. The Ottoman Empire emerged from the chaotic fragmentation of Anatolia following the decline of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum. The Seljuks, who had dominated much of Asia Minor since their victory in 1071, suffered a catastrophic defeat by the Mongols at the Battle of in 1243. This battle shattered centralized Seljuk authority, reducing the Sultanate to a vassal of the Mongols based in Persia. By the late 13th century, Anatolia was divided among numerous small Turkish principalities known as. These frontier states were led by Ghazi warriors, Muslim fighters dedicated to holy war, jihad, against non-Muslim neighbors, particularly the Byzantine Empire, which still controlled Anatolia, the Aegean coast, and parts of the Balkans. The Byzantine Empire itself was in steep decline. The Fourth Crusade sack of Constantinople in 1204 had fractured it into successor states, and although the dynasty restored the empire in 1261, it never regained its former strength. Constant civil wars, economic exhaustion, and pressure from Serbs, Bulgars, and Turks weakened it further. Byzantine Asia Minor had largely been lost, with only a few coastal cities and scattered inland enclaves remaining under imperial control. It was in this power vacuum along the Byzantine frontier that the Ottoman state was born. One and the foundation of the dynasty, circa 1299 to 1323, 1324. The traditional founder of the Ottoman dynasty is one, also spelled Othman, or from whom the name Ottoman derives in Turkish. From was the son of leader of the tribe, one of many Turkish nomadic groups that had migrated westward after the Mongol invasions. Historical sources on early life are sparse and largely retrospective. The earliest Ottoman chronicles were written over a century later, during the reigns of one and tend to embellish events to legitimize the dynasty. Modern historians therefore treat dates and details with caution. According to tradition, received the frontier district of near the Byzantine town of Nicaea, modern, as a grant, from the Seljuk Sultan, 3 in return for military service against the Byzantines. After death around 1281, inherited leadership of this small territory. First documented military success came around 1299, the conventional founding date of the Ottoman state, when he defeated a Byzantine force at the Battle of near Modern. This victory encouraged local Turkish warriors to join his banner and marked the beginning of systematic raids into. Strategy combined military aggression with diplomacy. He forged alliances through marriage, a common Turkish tribal practice, and offered generous terms to local Byzantine landowners who submitted. Many Greek peasants and minor nobles preferred Ottoman rule, characterized by lower taxes and protection from arbitrary imperial officials, to distant Byzantine authority. Key early conquests included the capture of several small fortresses in the valley, the siege and eventual fall of, which became first administrative center. By the time of his death, traditionally dated 1323 or 1324, had expanded his principality to include much of the region between Bursa and Nicaea, laying the foundation for future growth. And the institutionalization of the state, 1323, 1324 to 1362. Sun inherited a thriving frontier. More is known about reign thanks to slightly earlier sources, including Byzantine chronicles and inscriptions. Most significant achievement was the capture of Bursa in 1326 after a long siege. He made it his capital, transforming it from a Byzantine city into a Muslim center with mosques, madrasas, and soup kitchens. The city's fall marked the first major Ottoman urban conquest and signaled the growing power. Continued his father's policy of attracting Byzantine defectors. One notable convert was a local Greek lord who became a trusted Ottoman commander. Military innovations included the establishment of a standing infantry force paid in salaries, rather than relying solely on tribal cavalry. Early experiments with what would become the Janissary Corps, though the full child levy system developed later. In 1337, captured, and in 1345 to 1346, Nicaea. These conquests isolated Byzantine Bursa and pushed the frontier to the Sea of. Crucially, expanded into Europe. In 1354, an earthquake damaged the walls of Gallipoli, and Ottoman forces under Pasha, son, seized the peninsula. This first permanent Ottoman foothold in Europe gave them control of the Dardanelles and access to Thrace. Also strengthened legitimacy through marriage alliances. In 1346, he married Theodora, daughter of the Byzantine pretender John VI, during the Byzantine Civil War. This alliance allowed Ottoman troops to intervene in European affairs, gaining valuable experience fighting European armies. By death in 1362, the Ottoman state controlled most of Anatolia and a bridgehead in Europe. 1 from to Sultanate, 1362 to 1389. 1 was the first Ottoman ruler to adopt the title Sultan and style himself Sultan of the Ghazis. His reign transformed the principality into a major regional power. Shifted the capital to after capturing it in 1369. This move to Europe emphasized the Ottoman focus on the Balkans and made logistical sense for campaigns there. Major Balkan conquests included Philippopolis Plovdiv in 1363 to 1364, Sofia around 1385, much of Bulgaria and Macedonia, incorporated conquered populations through the millet system precursor, granting religious communities autonomy in exchange for taxes and loyalty. Militarily, formalized the Janissary Corps, recruiting Christian youths, initially prisoners of war, later through systematic levy, and converting them to Islam. Trained as elite infantry loyal only to the Sultan, they became the backbone of the Ottoman army. The system, though fully institutionalized later, began under. It provided both soldiers and administrators, breaking the power of Turkish tribal nobility. Also created the timur system, land grants timurs given to in return for military service. This decentralized but efficient system funded the army without draining the treasury. The reign culminated in the Battle of Kosovo on June 15, 1389. Facing a coalition led by Serbian Prince Lazar, Murad's forces won a costly victory. Murad himself was assassinated on the battlefield, tradition says, by a Serbian noble who feigned surrender, but his son Bayezid I secured the succession. The Battle of Kosovo had lasting significance. It shattered organized Serbian resistance and opened the southern Balkans to Ottoman expansion, though local lords retained autonomy for decades. Bayezid I Yildirim, the Thunderbolt and the First Crisis, 1389 to 1402. Bayezid I earned his nickname for the speed of his campaigns. He immediately consolidated power by executing his brother Yakub, a practice that became known as fratricide and was later codified to prevent civil wars. Bayezid completed the conquest of remaining Anatolian beyliks, Karaman, Aydin, Saruhan, Jermian, Mentesh, etc., incorporating them into the Ottoman domain. This unification of Western Anatolia created a powerful state stretching from the Danube to the Taurus Mountains. In Europe, Bayezid subdued Bulgaria, annexed Thessaly, and besieged Constantinople, 1394 to 1402. He blockaded the city by building the Anadolu Hisari fortress on the Bosphorus. A European crusade organized by Sigismund of Hungary in 1396 ended disastrously for the Christians at Nicopolis. Bayezid's victory over this large French-Hungarian army confirmed Ottoman dominance in the Balkans. However, Bayezid's rapid expansion provoked Timur Tamerlane, the Central Asian conqueror who claimed suzerainty over Anatolian Turks. In 1402, Timur invaded Anatolia, defeating Bayezid at the Battle of Ankara on July 20, 1402. Bayezid was captured and died in captivity, possibly suicide, in 1403. The defeat triggered the Ottoman Interregnum, 1402 to 1413, a civil war among Bayezid's sons that nearly destroyed the state. The Interregnum and Restoration, 1402 to 1421. The Interregnum saw Bayezid's sons, Suleiman, Issa, Mehmed, and Musa, compete for control. Timur restored the defeated Anatolian beyliks and withdrew, leaving chaos. Suleiman ruled the European provinces from Edirne, adopting Byzantine court ceremonial. Mehmed, later Mehmed I, controlled parts of Anatolia from Amasya. Musa briefly seized power in Europe but was defeated and killed by Mehmed in 1413. Mehmed I Celebi, the gentleman, emerged victorious in 1413. He spent his reign, 1413 to 1421, patiently restoring central authority, reincorporating lost Anatolian territories through diplomacy rather than force, and rebuilding the army and administration. Mehmed also suppressed rebellions, including the Messianic movement led by Sheikh Bedreddin in 1416, which combined social revolutionary and mystical elements. Murad II and the Consolidation, 1421 to 1451. Murad II faced immediate challenges: a Byzantine-backed pretender, Mustafa Celebi, and renewed Anatolian revolts. He defeated these threats and turned to the Balkans. Key events: defeat of a Hungarian crusade at Varna in 1444, where King Władysław of Poland-Hungary was killed. Second victory over a crusade at Kosovo in 1448. These victories secured Ottoman control over the Balkans for generations. Murad briefly abdicated in 1444 in favor of his son Mehmed II, but returned in 1446 after Janissary unrest. He died in 1451, leaving the throne to the young Mehmed. Mehmed II the Conqueror and the fall of Constantinople, 1451 to 1481. Mehmed II, aged 19 at accession, had one overriding ambition: the capture of Constantinople. He prepared meticulously. Built the Rumeli Hisari fortress on the European Bosphorus shore in 1452, completing the blockade. Assembled a large army, 80,000 to 100,000 men, and navy. Commissioned massive cannons from the Hungarian engineer Urban, including a 27-foot bombard capable of firing 1,200-pound stones. The siege began on April 6, 1453. After 53 days of bombardment, mining, and assaults, Ottoman forces breached the Theodosian walls on May 29 through the St. Romanus Gate. Emperor Constantine XI died fighting. The fall of Constantinople ended the Byzantine Empire after 1126 years. Mehmed entered the city on May 29, prayed in Hagia Sophia, converted into a mosque, and proclaimed himself Kaisar-i Rum, Caesar of Rome. He rebuilt the city as Istanbul, encouraging repopulation by Muslims, Christians, and Jews. The ecumenical patriarchate was re-established under Gennadios II, ensuring Orthodox Christian loyalty. Mehmed's later conquests included Serbia, 1459, Mora, 1460, Trebizond, 1461, and Bosnia. He fought wars against Venice and Uzun Hasan of the Akyunlu. Administratively, maimed centralized power, reducing the influence of Turkish nobility and relying on Devshirme officials. He issued the Kanun-Namai Ali Osman, codifying laws. Conclusion: from Beylik to empire. In less than 2 centuries, the Ottomans transformed from a minor frontier principality into a transcontinental empire, controlling key trade routes and major cities. This rise owed much to strategic location on the Byzantine frontier, effective military organization, Janissaries Timurs, pragmatic policies toward conquered populations, ruthless but efficient succession practices, skilled leadership from Osman to Mehmed II. The capture of Constantinople in 1453 marked the symbolic transition from Ghazi state to universal empire, setting the stage for the classical Ottoman age under Suleiman and his successors. Chapter 2. The classical age begins Mehmed II the Conqueror and the transformation of the empire, 1451 to 1481. Mehmed II's early life and preparation for rule. Mehmed II, known to history as Fatih the Conqueror, was born on March 30, 1432 in Edirne, the Ottoman European capital. He was the son of Murad II and Huma Hatun, a concubine of uncertain origin, possibly Slavic or Turkish. From an early age, Mehmed was groomed for leadership. At age 12, in 1444, his father briefly abdicated in his favor during a period of retirement to Manisa, but Janissary unrest and the Crusade of Varna forced Murad's return. This short first reign, 1444 to 1446, gave the young prince a taste of power and a lasting resentment toward conservative factions that opposed him. Mehmed spent the next years as governor of Manisa, receiving a broad education in Islamic sciences, Persian literature, Greek philosophy, through translations, military strategy, and statecraft. His tutors included prominent scholars like Mala Gurani and Akshemseddin, the latter a Sufi mystic who would later play a spiritual role in the conquest of Constantinople. When Murad II died in February 1451, Mehmed, now 19, ascended the throne unopposed. His first act was to order the execution of his infant half-brother Ahmed to prevent future rivalry, a harsh but pragmatic application of the emerging Ottoman principle of fratricide, later justified by Mehmed himself as necessary for the stability of the state. The conquest of Constantinople, 1453, planning and execution. Mehmed's obsession with capturing Constantinople was no secret. The city, though reduced to a shadow of its former self, population perhaps 40,000 to 50,000, remained a symbolic and strategic prize. It controlled the Bosphorus, blocked full Ottoman unification of their European and Asian territories, and represented the enduring legacy of Rome and Byzantium. Preparation was meticulous and spanned 2 years. Fortress construction. In 1452, Mehmed ordered the construction of Rumeli Hisari on the European shore of the Bosphorus, opposite the older Anadolu Hisari built by Bayezid I. Completed in 4 months under the supervision of the Sultan himself, it housed massive cannons and effectively closed the strait to Byzantine shipping. Army and Navy mobilization. Mehmed assembled an army estimated at 80,000 to 100,000 regular troops, plus irregulars Bashi-Bazoks, bringing the total force to perhaps 150,000 to 200,000. The Navy numbered around 120 to 150 vessels, including galleys and transports. Artillery revolution. The most revolutionary element was the artillery train. Mehmed employed a Hungarian engineer named Urban or Orban, who cast a supergun capable of firing stone balls weighing over 1,200 pounds, approximately 600 kg. Known as the Basilica, this bombard, along with dozens of smaller cannons, represented the cutting edge of 15th-century gunpowder technology. The siege began on April 6, 1453. The defenders, led by Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, numbered fewer than 8,000, including Genoese volunteers under Giovanni Giustiniani. The Theodosian walls, though formidable, had never faced sustained bombardment of this scale. Key phases. Weeks of bombardment weakened the walls, particularly in the Lycus Valley near the Gate of St. Romanus. Ottoman attempts to undermine walls with mines were countered by Byzantine engineer Johannes Grant. A daring Ottoman naval maneuver to drag ships overland into the Golden Horn, April 22, bypassed the defensive chain, though it did not decisively shift the balance. On May 29, after a final massive assault, Janissaries breached the walls at the Blascherny section and near the St. Romanus Gate. Giustiniani was wounded and withdrew, causing panic. Constantine XI died fighting. His body was never definitively identified. Maimed entered the city that afternoon, rode to Hagia Sophia, and ordered it converted into a mosque. Looting was limited to 3 days as per Islamic custom, after which the Sultan enforced order. Rebuilding Istanbul, from Byzantine capital to Ottoman metropolis. The fall of Constantinople marked not an end but a beginning. Maimed consciously set out to make the city the worthy capital of a world empire. Repopulation. The city's population had plummeted. Maimed issued decrees encouraging resettlement. Muslims from Anatolia and the Balkans were granted houses and tax exemptions. Greek families who remained or returned were guaranteed safety. Jewish communities from across the empire were invited, as were Armenians. Religious policy. Maimed re-established the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate under Gennadios II Scholarios, 1454, granting it authority over Orthodox Christians throughout the empire. This laid the foundation for the millet system, in which non-Muslim communities governed their own personal and religious affairs under state oversight. Architecture and infrastructure. The Topkapi Palace complex began construction in 1459 to 1465 on the site of the ancient Acropolis. The Bidistan, covered market, and Grand Bazaar were developed to revive commerce. Numerous churches were converted to mosques, but many remained in Christian use. Symbolic claim to Roman legacy. Maimed styled himself Caesari Rum, Caesar of Rome, and cultivated an image as universal sovereign. He invited Italian humanists, such as Gentile Bellini, who painted his famous portrait, and Greek scholars to his court. By the 1470s, Istanbul's population had risen to perhaps 70,000 to 100,000, with vibrant Muslim, Greek, Jewish, and Armenian quarters. Further conquests and wars, 1453 to 1481. Maimed's reign was almost continuously martial. Major campaigns included Serbia, 1454 to 1459. After initial vassalage, direct annexation followed the fall of Smederevo in 1459. Mora Peloponnese, 1458 to 1460. The Byzantine despotate was extinguished. The last Palaiologos brothers were executed. Trebizond, 1461. The last Greek successor state on the Black Sea coast fell, ending all independent Byzantine polities. Wallachia, 1462. Vlad III, the Impaler, was briefly replaced with a more compliant voivode after Maimed's campaign. Bosnia, 1463. Annexed, with many nobles converting to Islam, forming the nucleus of the Bosnian Muslim community. Crimean Khanate, 1475, became an Ottoman vassal after the fall of Kaffa, securing the Black Sea. Wars with Venice, 1463 to 1479. A long naval and land conflict ended with Venice ceding Negropont, Euboea, Lemnos, and parts of Albania, and paying annual tribute. Otranto Expedition, 1480 to 1481. Ottoman forces briefly occupied the Italian port of Otranto as a potential bridgehead for further Italian campaigns, but Maimed's death led to withdrawal. In Anatolia, Mehmed subdued the Karaman Principality, 1474, and fought the Aksunlu Turkomans under Uzun Hasan, defeating them decisively at the Battle of Bashkent, 1473. Administrative and legal reforms. Mehmed centralized power more than any predecessor. Canon name. He issued the first comprehensive Ottoman law code, Canon Name Ali Osman, regulating palace protocol, provincial administration, taxation, and criminal law. It asserted the Sultan's authority to legislate alongside Sharia. Devshirme and Kapikulu. The child levy system was systematized, providing janissaries and palace officials loyal exclusively to the Sultan, counterbalancing Turkish aristocratic families. Land and taxation. Timur holdings were reorganized. Many former Byzantine estates became state domain, miri. Diminishing ulama and nobility. High religious scholars and old Ghazi families lost influence to Palestrine bureaucrats. These reforms created a highly centralized, bureaucratic empire, distinct from the looser confederation of earlier decades. Court culture and patronage. Mehmed was a polyglot ruler fluent in Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, and some Latin and Slavic. His court blended Turkish Islamic, Persian, and Byzantine elements. Patronage of scholars like Ali Kushsu, astronomer-mathematician, and historians, Tursun Beg, author of Tarihi Ebul Feth. Construction of the Fatih Mosque Complex, 1463 to 1470, including 8 madrasas that became the empire's premier educational institution. Interest in European Renaissance art and science, correspondence with Italian city-states. Death and succession. Mehmed died suddenly on May 3, 1481, aged 49, possibly poisoned. Suspicions fell on his physician Yakub Pasha, a Jewish convert or Venetian agents, though gout and natural causes are more likely. He was campaigning toward Anatolia or possibly planning further Italian expeditions. His sons Bayezid and Sem contested the throne. Bayezid II emerged victorious, with Sem fleeing to Rhodes and later European captivity. Legacy of Mehmed the Conqueror. Mehmed transformed the Ottoman state from a Ghazi frontier principality into a gunpowder empire claiming universal sovereignty. The conquest of Constantinople ranks among the most consequential events in world history, marking the definitive end of the Middle Ages and the rise of a new Islamic power in southeastern Europe. His administrative centralization, military innovations, and cultural synthesis laid foundations that endured for centuries. Yet his ruthless policies, fratricide, confiscation of noble lands, heavy taxation to fund wars, also sowed seeds of resentment that would surface later. Chapter 3. Consolidation and Piety, the Reigns of Bayezid II and the Transition to Selim I, 1481 to 1520. Bayezid II's accession and the Sem Sultan crisis, 1481 to 1495. Bayezid II ascended the throne on May 19, 1481, just days after Mehmed II's unexpected death. Unlike previous successions, this one was contested. Mehmed's younger son, Prince Sem Jem, supported by a faction of the military and some grandees, proclaimed himself Sultan in Bursa. Bayezid, backed by the Janissaries and Grand Vizier Ishak Pasha, marched swiftly from Amasya and defeated Sem's forces near Yenishehir. Sem fled first to the Mamluk Sultanate in Cairo, then in 1482 to the island of Rhodes, seeking protection from the Knights Hospitaller. The Knights, recognizing Sem's value as a potential pretender, handed him over to the papacy in exchange for financial and diplomatic concessions. Sem spent the remainder of his life as a gilded prisoner in Europe, first in France under Pope Innocent VIII, then in Rome under Alexander VI, and finally with the French King Charles VIII during his Italian campaign. This Sem affair dominated the first half of Bayezid's reign. European powers repeatedly threatened to use Sem as a weapon against the Ottomans, demanding annual tribute for his upkeep, paid by Bayezid to prevent his release. Sem died in Naples in February 1495, possibly poisoned on Bayezid's orders or by the Borgias. His body was returned to the Ottoman Empire in 1499 and buried in Bursa. The crisis drained Ottoman resources and forced Bayezid into a cautious foreign policy, avoiding major European conflicts while Sem lived. Character and style of rule: Bayezid the Sufi Sultan. Bayezid II reigned 1481 to 1512, presented a stark contrast to his conquering father. Known as Bayezid I Veli, the saintly in Ottoman tradition, he was pious, scholarly, and inclined toward mysticism. He patronized Sufi orders, particularly the Havedi and Bayrami tarikats, and was himself initiated into the latter. His court emphasized poetry, theology, and calligraphy over martial display. This did not mean weakness. Bayezid maintained the centralized institutions built by Mehmed II while softening some of their harsher edges. He returned many confiscated lands to their former owners, earning gratitude from the Turkish nobility alienated by Mehmed's policies. He also reduced the frequency of fratricide. None of his brothers were executed upon his accession, a departure from recent practice. Administratively, Bayezid relied on capable grand viziers such as Jedik Ahmed Pasha, executed in 1482 for suspected pro-Sem sympathies, Ishak Pasha, and later Hadim Ali Pasha. The Devshirme system continued, but Bayezid balanced it by promoting more Turkish-born Muslims to high office. Military campaigns and territorial changes. Despite his reputation for piety, Bayezid's reign saw significant, if less spectacular, expansion. War with Venice, 1499 to 1503. Triggered by Ottoman naval raids and Venetian support for Sem, this conflict marked the first major Ottoman use of a modern navy. Under Admiral Kemal Reis, Ottoman fleets raided Venetian possessions in the Mora and Aegean. Key victories included the battles of Zancio, Navarino in 1499, the first naval engagement involving broadside cannon fire, and the capture of Lepanto, Modon, Coron, and Durazzo. The war ended with Venice recognizing Ottoman gains and paying indemnity. Conquest of Herzegovina, 1481 to 1483. Completed the annexation begun under Mehmed II. Black Sea and Moldavia. Campaigns against the Principality of Moldavia, 1484 to 1486, led by Stephen the Great, ended in stalemate, but the ports of Kilia and Ackerman, Cetadia Alba, were captured in 1484, securing Ottoman control of the Danube estuary. The Crimean Khanate, already a vassal, was more firmly integrated under Mingli Jure. Relations with the Mamluks. A prolonged war, 1485 to 1491, over Cilicia and the buffer principality of Dulkadir ended inconclusively. Neither side achieved decisive victory, and a peace treaty in 1491 maintained the status quo. This conflict highlighted growing Ottoman interest in the Arab lands. In Europe, Bayezid avoided large-scale confrontation with Hungary, preferring diplomacy and vassalage arrangements with Wallachia and Moldavia. Cultural and religious policies, tolerance and patronage. Bayezid's reign is remembered for religious tolerance and cultural flourishing. Welcoming Sephardic Jews. After the 1492 expulsion of Jews from Spain by Ferdinand and Isabella, Bayezid issued invitations to settle in Ottoman lands. He reportedly remarked that the Spanish monarchs had impoverished their own kingdom while enriching his. Thousands of Sephardim settled in Istanbul, Salonika, Izmir, and Safed, bringing expertise in finance, medicine, printing, and trade. This influx transformed Salonika into a majority Jewish city for centuries. Architectural patronage. Bayezid commissioned the Bayezid II mosque complex in Istanbul, 1501 to 1506, designed by Hayreddin, featuring an innovative hospital, Darüş Şifa, specializing in mental health care. He also built mosques and emirates in Edirne, Amasya, and elsewhere. Literary and scholarly court. Poets like Nekati and scholars like Idris Bitlisi flourished. The Ottoman Turkish language began to mature as a literary medium alongside Persian. Economic developments. The incorporation of Black Sea ports and improved Aegean security boosted trade. Ottoman merchants gained greater access to Eastern European grain, slaves, and furs. The state maintained strict control over strategic commodities like alum and grain exports. Inflation from New World silver had not yet impacted the empire significantly. The Ottoman axe remained relatively stable. The Safavid threat and religious polarization. The most ominous development emerged in the east. Shah Ismail I founded the Safavid dynasty in 1501, proclaiming Twelver Shi'ism as the state religion of Persia. Ismail's propaganda among Turkmen tribes in Anatolia, many of whom shared Kizilbash, red head, esoteric beliefs, posed an existential ideological threat to Sunni Ottoman rule. The Safavids portrayed the Ottomans as insufficiently Islamic, while Ottoman ulama condemned Shi'ism as heresy. This religious divide would define Ottoman Eastern policy for centuries. Revolts inspired by Safavid agents occurred periodically, the most serious being the Shakulu Rebellion in 1511, which ravaged southwestern Anatolia before being suppressed. Succession crisis and abdication, 1512. By 1510, Bayezid, aged and ill, faced pressure over succession. He had several sons, Ahmed, Korkut, and Selim. Ahmed, governor of Amasya, was favored by the Sultan and much of the court. Korkut, cultured and scholarly, ruled in Manisa. Selim, governor of Trabzon, was ambitious and militarily experienced. Selim demanded a governorship closer to Istanbul. Trabzon was too remote. When refused, he rebelled in 1511, marching toward the capital with Crimean Tatar support. Bayezid hesitated to confront his son decisively. Janissaries, increasingly favoring the aggressive Selim, mutinied in Istanbul in April 1512, forcing Bayezid to abdicate on April 24. Bayezid retired to Dimtoka but died en route on May 26, 1512. Rumors of poisoning by Selim's agents persist but lack proof. Selim I executed his brothers Ahmed and Korkut and their sons shortly after, re-establishing the practice of fratricide. Selim I, the Grim and Preparations for Conquest, 1512 to 1520. Selim I's 8-year reign, 1512 to 1520, dramatically altered the empire's orientation. Known as Yavuz, the stern or grim, Selim combined religious zeal with ruthless efficiency. Upon accession, Selim purged potential rivals. Besides his brothers, thousands of suspected supporters were eliminated. He centralized power further, reducing the influence of grandees. His primary obsessions were the Safavid threat and control of the Arab Islamic heartlands. The conquest of the East, Safavids and Mamluks. Campaign against the Safavids, 1514. The Battle of Chaldiran, August 23, 1514, pitted Ottoman gunpowder technology, Janissary muskets and artillery against Safavid cavalry. Despite fierce Kizilbash charges, Ottoman firepower prevailed. Tabriz was briefly occupied, and eastern Anatolia, including Diyarbakir and Kurdistan, was annexed. Chaldiran halted Safavid expansion westward but did not destroy their state. Ismail escaped, and logistical limits prevented deeper pursuit. The victory solidified Sunni dominance in Anatolia and justified Selim's harsh measures against suspected Shiites. Conquest of the Mamluk Sultanate, 1516 to 1517. The Mamluks, ruling Syria, Egypt, and the Hijaz, were weakened by internal divisions and Portuguese naval pressure in the Indian Ocean. Battle of Marj Dabik, August 24, 1516. North of Aleppo, Ottoman artillery again proved decisive. Mamluk Sultan Kansa al-Ghori died during the battle, possibly of stroke. Syria fell rapidly. Damascus submitted peacefully. Campaign in Egypt, 1517. After securing Palestine, Selim defeated remaining Mamluk forces at Ridania, January 22, 1517, where clever use of chained cannons behind field fortifications broke a Mamluk charge. Cairo was captured. The last Mamluk Sultan, Tuman Bey, was executed after a brief guerrilla resistance. The Sharif of Mecca submitted, transferring guardianship of the holy cities. The last Abbasid caliph in Cairo, al-Mutawakkil III, formally transferred the caliphate to Selim, a transfer of debatable legal validity but immense symbolic value. Consequences of the Eastern Conquest. By 1520, the empire had nearly doubled in size. Direct control of Syria, Egypt, and the Hijaz. Vassalage over North Africa. Algiers submitted to Barbarossa brothers in 1518 to 1519. Revenues soared from Egyptian taxes and Red Sea trade. Selim reorganized administration. Egypt retained special status under an Ottoman governor, but kept much of its Mamluk bureaucracy. Arabic became an administrative language alongside Turkish. The ulama of Cairo and Damascus were integrated into the Ottoman religious hierarchy. Death and legacy of the early 16th century transition. Selim died on September 22, 1520, from cancer, possibly anthrax or infection. His only surviving son, Sulayman, succeeded without opposition. The period 1481 to 1520 bridged the era of Mehmed the Conqueror's centralizing conquests and Sulayman's classical age. Bayezid provided stability and cultural depth, while Selim's brutal efficiency shifted the empire's center of gravity southward and eastward, making it the undisputed leader of the Islamic world. Chapter 4. Sulayman the Magnificent, the zenith of the Ottoman Empire, 1520 to 1566. Ascension and early consolidation, 1520 to 1522. Sulayman I ascended the Ottoman throne on September 30, 1520, at the age of 26, following the death of his father Selim I. Unlike many previous successions, there was no rivalry. Sulayman was Selim's only surviving son, all potential brothers having been eliminated earlier. This smooth transition allowed immediate focus on governance rather than civil war. Sulayman inherited an empire transformed by his father's conquests, direct control over Anatolia, the Balkans, Syria, Egypt, and the Hijaz, with vassals in North Africa, Wallachia, Moldavia, and the Crimean Khanate. The treasury was full from Egyptian revenues, and the military, particularly the Janissary Corps and artillery train, was at its peak. The young sultan quickly signaled a new style. He dismissed several of Selim's harsher officials and released political prisoners. His first grand vizier was Piri Mehmed Pasha, an elderly statesman who advocated caution. Sulayman also married his longtime favorite, Hurrem, known in Europe as Roxolana, breaking with tradition by formally elevating a concubine to legal wife, Hayski Sultan, around 1533 to 1534. Early military actions were limited but strategic. Suppression of a rebellion in Damascus by Governor Camberdi Ghazali, 1521. Reassertion of control over Belgrade, captured in 1521 after a short siege. Belgrade's fall opened the Hungarian plain to Ottoman advance. The conquest of Rhodes and naval development, 1522. In 1522, Sulayman launched a massive campaign against the Knights Hospitaller on Rhodes, a Christian stronghold harassing Muslim shipping in the eastern Mediterranean. The siege lasted 6 months, June to December 1522, involving over 100,000 Ottoman troops and heavy artillery. Despite fierce resistance, the knights surrendered on honorable terms. They were allowed to depart with arms and relics. The conquest eliminated a major pirate base and secured Ottoman sea lanes between Istanbul and Egypt. It also marked the beginning of sustained Ottoman naval investment under admirals like Kurtoglu Muslihidin and later Hayreddin Barbarossa. The Battle of Mohacs and the Partition of Hungary, 1526. Hungary, weakened by internal divisions and the young King Louis II's ineffective rule, became Suleiman's primary European target. In 1526, he led an army of approximately 60,000 to 100,000 men northward. The decisive encounter occurred at Mohacs on August 29, 1526. The Hungarian army, around 25,000, including heavy cavalry, charged prematurely and was destroyed by coordinated Ottoman artillery, Janissary volleys, and Sipahi flanking maneuvers. The battle lasted barely 2 hours. King Louis drowned fleeing across a stream. Over 15,000 Hungarian nobles and soldiers perished, effectively decapitating the kingdom. Suleiman occupied Buda unopposed in September but withdrew for the winter, leaving a power vacuum. Rival claimants emerged: Ferdinand of Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, and John Zapolia, voivode of Transylvania. Suleiman supported Zapolia as vassal king, 1529, leading to a partitioned Hungary. Royal Hungary in the west under Habsburgs. Central Hungary under direct or indirect Ottoman administration. Transylvania as an Ottoman vassal principality. Mohacs marked the high point of Ottoman land expansion in Europe and ensured Balkan dominance for over a century. Sieges of Vienna and Central European limits, 1529 and 1532. Emboldened by Mohacs, Suleiman aimed at Vienna, capital of the Habsburg lands. The 1529 campaign mobilized perhaps 120,000 troops, but logistical challenges, heavy rains turning roads to mud, long supply lines, delayed arrival until late September. The siege, September 27 to October 15, failed due to stubborn Habsburg defense under Nicholas von Salm, Ottoman losses from disease and cold, inability to fully deploy heavy artillery, many guns abandoned en route. Suleiman withdrew, but the campaign demonstrated Ottoman reach into the heart of Europe. A second attempt in 1532 was more precautionary, responding to Habsburg incursions. Suleiman besieged the minor fortress of Gunz Koszeg, where a small garrison under Nicola Jurisic delayed him for weeks. By the time he reached Vienna's vicinity, Charles V had assembled a large relief army. No major siege occurred, and peace negotiations began. The campaigns established the Danube as the approximate frontier, with Ottoman garrisons in Buda and Pest. Eastern campaigns against the Safavids, 1534 to 1535, 1548 to 1549, 1554 to 1555. Suleiman conducted 3 major campaigns against Safavid Persia under Shah Tahmasp I, driven by religious, Sunni vs Shiite, and strategic motives. The 2 Iraq's campaign, 1534 to 1535. Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha captured Tabriz. Suleiman took Baghdad after the Safavids abandoned it. Iraq, including Basra, was permanently annexed, securing the Persian Gulf approach. Later campaigns. Further incursions recaptured Tabriz temporarily, but could not hold it due to scorched earth tactics by Tahmasp. The Peace of Amasya, 1555, formalized Ottoman control of Iraq and eastern Anatolia, while Persia retained Tabriz and the Caucasus. These wars solidified Ottoman Sunni orthodoxy and integrated Arab Iraq into the empire. Naval supremacy and Mediterranean dominance. Under Hayreddin Barbarossa, appointed Caputin Pasha in 1534, the Ottoman navy achieved hegemony. Preveza, 1538. Barbarossa defeated a combined Holy League fleet under Andrea Doria off western Greece, securing Ottoman control of the eastern Mediterranean. Capitulations with France, 1536. Formal alliance against Habsburgs granted French merchants trading privileges and joint naval operations. Algerian and Tunisian bases. Barbarossa's brothers and successors turned North Africa into Ottoman regencies, extending influence to Morocco's borders. Late setbacks included the loss of Tunis temporarily to Charles V, 1535, and the failed Great Siege of Malta, 1565. But overall naval power remained unmatched until Lepanto in 1571, after Sulayman's death. Legal and administrative reforms. The lawgiver. Sulayman's Turkish epithet, Kanuni, derives from his comprehensive legal reforms. Working with Sheikh ul-Islam Ebesud Effendi, one of the greatest Ottoman jurists, he harmonized Sultanic law canon with Islamic Sharia. Key achievements. Compilation of provincial canon names regulating taxation, land tenure, and criminal penalties. Standardization of timur assignments and tax assessments based on cadastral surveys, Tahrir Defterleri. Protection of Riya, tax-paying subjects, from arbitrary exploitation by officials. Formalization of the millet system, granting non-Muslims, Greek Orthodox, Armenian, Jewish, communal autonomy under their religious leaders. The central bureaucracy expanded. The Imperial Council, Divan Letter 131 Humyan, met regularly, with increased record-keeping. The Devshirme system peaked, supplying thousands of janissaries and officials. Cultural and architectural golden age. Sulayman's reign witnessed unprecedented artistic patronage, centered on chief architect Mimar Sinan, circa 1489 to 1588, who built over 300 structures. Major works. Shahzad Mosque, 1543 to 1548, dedicated to Sulayman's deceased son Mehmed, Sinan's first imperial commission. Sulaymani Complex, 1550 to 1557, Istanbul's largest mosque complex, including madrasas, hospital, soup kitchen, and Sinan's masterpiece dome, inspired by but surpassing Hagia Sophia. Numerous bridges, e.g., Büyükçekmece, aqueducts, caravanserais, and palaces across the empire. Other arts flourished. Miniature painting, Nakşiçhane studio under artists like Matrixi Nasa. Calligraphy and illuminated manuscripts. Poetry in Turkish, Persian, and Arabic. Sulayman himself wrote under the pen name Muhibi. The court attracted scholars from across the Islamic world, making Istanbul a cultural capital rivaling Renaissance Italy. Harem politics and succession intrigues. Sulayman's personal life profoundly influenced late-reign politics. His marriage to Hurrem Sultan produced 6 children named Mihrama, Abdullah, Selim, Bayezid, Cihangir, breaking the one concubine, one son tradition. Hurrem's influence grew after moving from the provinces to Topkapi Palace. She corresponded with foreign rulers, including Sigismund II of Poland, and advised on policy. Rivalries intensified. Prince Mustafa, son of Mahidevran Gulbahar, was the most capable and popular, especially with janissaries. In 1553, on campaign in Iran, Sulayman ordered Mustafa's execution for alleged treason, likely influenced by Hurrem and her ally Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha. Cihangir died of grief shortly after. After Hurrem's death in 1558, remaining sons Selim and Bayezid vied for power. Bayezid rebelled in 1559 and fled to Safavid Persia. He and his sons were executed in 1561 to 1562. Selim too emerged as sole heir, marking the beginning of weaker sultans and increased harem influence. Final campaign and death, 1566. In 1566, at age 71 and suffering from gout, Sulayman led his 13th and final campaign against Habsburg Hungary. The target was Szijtvar, defended by Nikola IV Zrinski. The fortress fell on September 8 after heroic resistance, but Suleiman died in his tent on September 6 to 7. The exact date is uncertain. His death was concealed for weeks until Selim arrived from Kudahia to prevent disorder. His body was returned to Istanbul and buried in a grand tomb adjacent to the Süleymaniye Mosque, designed by Sinan. Legacy of Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman's 46-year reign represented the Ottoman Empire at its absolute peak. Territorial extent, approximately 15 million square kilometers. Population, around 25 to 30 million. Military, administrative, and cultural institutions at maximum efficiency. He embodied the ideal of the universal sovereign, warrior, lawgiver, patron, and just ruler. European contemporaries compared him to Solomon, hence, magnificent, while Ottoman tradition revered him as the second greatest sultan after Mehmed II. Yet the seeds of future challenges were sown. Overextension, reliance on personality rather than institutions, and the tragic succession struggles that weakened the dynasty. Historians continue to debate whether Suleiman's era marked the true golden age, or merely the culmination of trends begun earlier. Undeniably, it set the standard by which all subsequent Ottoman rulers were measured. Chapter 5. The Post-Suleimanic Era, Stagnation, Crises, and the Sultanate of Women, 1566 to 1656. Selim II, the Sot, and the Shift in Power Dynamics, 1566 to 1574. Selim II, the sole surviving son of Suleiman and Hurrem, ascended in September 1566 at age 42. Nicknamed Sarhash, the drunkard in later folklore, though contemporary sources suggest exaggeration. He was the first sultan with no military campaign experience, having spent his life in palace comfort rather than provincial governorships. Selim's reign marked a pivotal transition. The sultan withdrew from active leadership, delegating authority to grand viziers and palace insiders. The locus of power shifted toward the imperial harem, beginning the era known as the Sultanate of Women, Kadınlar Sultanati, where Valide sultans, queen mothers, and Haski sultans wielded unprecedented influence. Key figures: Nurbanu Sultan, Selim's legal wife Haski and mother of Murad III. Of Venetian origin, possibly Cecilia Baffo, kidnapped by pirates, she became Valide Sultan upon Selim's death and dominated politics until 1583. Grand Vizier Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, a Devshirme Bosnian and Suleiman's son-in-law, Sokollu dominated state affairs from 1565 to 1579, providing continuity across 3 reigns. Major events: Conquest of Cyprus, 1570 to 1571. Despite papal and Venetian warnings, the Ottomans invaded Cyprus, a Venetian colony. Nicosia fell in 1570. Famagusta resisted heroically under Marcantonio Bragadin until 1571. The brutal flaying of Bragadin after surrender inflamed Christian Europe. Battle of Lepanto, 1571. A Holy League fleet, Spain, Venice, Papacy, under Don John of Austria decisively defeated the Ottoman navy off western Greece on October 7, 1571. Over 200 Ottoman galleys were lost. Though a psychological blow, the first major Ottoman naval defeat, Sokollu famously told the Venetian bailo, "In wresting Cyprus from you, we have cut off one of your arms. In defeating our fleet, you have only shaved our beard." The fleet was rebuilt within a year under Ulugh Ali, capturing Tunis in 1574. Peace with the Habsburgs, 1568. Renewed on favorable terms, allowing focus elsewhere. Selim died in December 1574 after slipping on wet marble in the palace hammam, striking his head fatally. Murad III and the height of harem influence, 1574 to 1595. Murad III, Nurbanu's son, ruled for 21 years. Devout and superstitious, he rarely left Topkapi Palace, fathering over 100 children. Nurbanu dominated early policy until her death in 1583, followed by Murad's favorite Safavid sultan, also Venetian origin, possibly Sophia Baffo. The reign saw prolonged war with Persia, 1578 to 1590, instigated by Ottoman opportunism after Safavid internal strife. Led by Özdemiroglu Osman Pasha, Ottoman forces captured Tabriz, 1585, and much of the Caucasus. The exhausting war ended with the Treaty of Istanbul, 1590, gaining Georgia, Azerbaijan, and parts of the Caucasus, Ottoman eastern gains at their maximum. Economic strain. American silver inflows caused severe inflation, the price revolution. The axe was repeatedly debased, eroding janissary salaries and Sipahi incomes. Corruption grew as officials sought bribes to compensate. English alliance, 1580. Capitulations granted to Elizabeth I opened direct trade, bypassing Venice. William Harborne became the first English ambassador in 1583. Murad died in January 1595, succeeded by his son Mehmed III. Mehmed III and the return of fratricide, 1595 to 1603. Mehmed III revived Süleymaniyya ruthlessness by executing 19 brothers upon accession, the largest mass fratricide in Ottoman history. Public outrage led to the practice being abandoned thereafter. Future sultans confined potential rivals to the cafes, in the palace. Military events. Long War with the Habsburgs, 1593 to 1606. Began under Murad III. Mehmed personally led the 1596 campaign, winning the Battle of Hassova Mesocrests, though nearly losing due to janissary panic. The war dragged on inconclusively, ending with the Peace of Zitvatorok, 1606. Under Ahmed I, Ottomans recognized Habsburg Emperor as equal, ended annual tribute from Austria, and lost minor territories. Celali rebellions begin. Socioeconomic crises, debasement, heavy taxation, Timur corruption, sparked provincial revolts in Anatolia. The most serious was led by Karyazisai Abdul Halim, 1598 to 1602, controlling much of central Anatolia before defeat. Mehmed died in 1603, leaving the throne to 13-year-old Ahmed I. Ahmed I and the end of fratricide, 1603 to 1617. Ahmed I's accession without executing brothers, chiefly Mustafa, marked the permanent shift to seniority succession and the cafe system. Confined princes often emerged mentally unstable after decades of isolation. Key developments. Construction of the Blue Mosque, Sultan Ahmed Mosque, 1609 to 1617. Designed by Sedefkar Mehmed Agha, Sinan's pupil, it rivaled Hagia Sophia with 6 minarets and exquisite Iznik tiles. Continued Celali rebellions. Kalendaroglu Mehmed crushed much of western Anatolia, 1607. Suppression required massive campaigns. Wars with Persia, 1603 to 1612, 1616 to 1618. Safavids recaptured lost territories. Treaties restored pre-1578 borders. Ahmed died of typhus in 1617, at age 27. The era of instability and cafe succession, 1617 to 1656. The next 4 decades saw rapid turnover and increasing palace dominance. Mustafa I, 1617 to 1618, 1622 to 1623. Ahmed's mentally unstable brother, twice enthroned and deposed. First Sultan deposed by Fatwa, 1618, and Janissary revolt. Osman II, Gens Osman, 1618 to 1622. Ambitious at 14, Osman sought radical reforms, replaced Janissaries with a new Anatolian Turkish army, reduced Devshirme dominance. His 1621 Houghton campaign against Poland failed. In 1622, Janissaries revolted, imprisoning and strangling him, the first regicide in Ottoman history. Murad IV, 1623 to 1640. Ascended at 11 under Mother Kursum Sultan's regency. Early reign chaotic with rebellions. From 1632, Murad ruled personally with terror. Alcohol ban enforced brutally, he executed thousands. Smoking prohibited. Achievements. Reconquest of Baghdad from Persia, 1638, after a grueling siege. Suppression of remaining Selali and provincial revolts. Restoration of central authority through fear. Murad died childless in 1640 from cirrhosis and gout. Ibrahim the Mad, 1640 to 1648. Murad's brother, confined 22 years in the caves. Mentally unstable, obsessed with furs and obese women. Extravagant spending drained treasury. Kursum Sultan and Janissaries dominated. Cretan War begins, 1645. Siege of Candia Heraclian lasted 24 years, 1648 to 1669, draining resources. In 1648, Janissaries and ulama deposed and strangled Ibrahim after he ordered mass executions. Maimed IV in the Kurpulu era, 1648 to 1683 onset, Maimed IV ascended at age 6. Regency initially under Kursum Sultan, who was murdered in 1651 by rival Tarhan Sultan, mother of Maimed. Tarhan became the last powerful Valide Sultan of the Classic era. Chaos peaked. Venice blockaded the Dardanelles, 1650s, Cossack raids, ongoing Cretan War. In 1656, Tarhan appointed Kurpulu Maimed Pasha as Grand Vizier on condition of absolute authority. Kurpulu, an Albanian Devshirm, restored order through ruthless purges, executing corrupt officials and rebels. His son Fazil Ahmed Kurpulu, Vizier 1661 to 1676, continued reforms. Conquest of Crete completed, 1669. Successful war against Poland, 1672 to 1676, gaining Podolia. The Kurpulu era, 1656 to 1703, with interruptions, provided the last sustained period of effective governance in the classical age. Social and economic trends. Inflation and debasement. The axe lost 80 to 90% of silver content by 1650. Lifelong timers became short-term leases, malakane, increasing corruption. Janissary degeneration. Corps grew from 12,000 under Suleiman to over 50,000, many non-combatant tradesmen. They became a privileged urban class, resisting reform. Provincial Ayan emergence. Local notables filled the power vacuum, collecting taxes and raising private armies. Cultural developments. Evliya Celebai's Seyahatname travelogue documented empire-wide diversity. Ottoman Baroque architecture began emerging. Conclusion: the end of the classical age. The century after Suleiman's death saw the empire's military and administrative systems ossify. While territorial extent remained vast, internal crises, economic disruption, rebellion, Janissary indiscipline, and palace intrigue eroded central control. The Kurpulu restoration delayed collapse, but the failed 1683 Vienna siege, under Mirzafan Lucara Mustafa Pasha, would mark the beginning of irreversible territorial retreat. The post-Suleimanic era thus transitioned the Ottoman Empire from dynamic expansion to defensive survival, setting the stage for 18th century reforms and 19th century decline. Chapter 6: The Long Retreat from the Siege of Vienna to the Tulip Period, 1656 to 1730. The Kurpulu Restoration and the Cretan War's conclusion, 1656 to 1676. The appointment of Kurpulu Maimed Pasha as Grand Vizier in September 1656 marked a turning point. Granted unprecedented authority by Valide Tarhan Sultan, Kurpulu ruthlessly purged corrupt officials, rebellious janissaries, and venal ulama. Within months, order was restored in Istanbul, and the Dardanelles blockade by Venice was broken in 1657. Kurpulu died in 1661, succeeded by his son Fazıl Ahmed Kurpulu, vizier 1661 to 1676. Fazıl Ahmed continued the reforms, streamlined taxation, and reduced palace expenditures, reorganized the navy under capable Caputan pashas. The longest outstanding conflict, the War of Candia-Crete, ended in 1669. After a 24-year siege, the longest in history, Candia Heraclian, surrendered to Fazıl Ahmed's forces under direct command. Venice retained only a few offshore fortresses. Crete became fully Ottoman. Fazıl Ahmed's final triumph was the Polish Campaign, 1672 to 1676. Exploiting Cossack unrest and Polish electoral chaos, Ottoman armies captured Podolia and parts of Ukraine. The Treaty of Zerano, 1676, forced Poland to pay tribute and cede territory, the last major Ottoman territorial gain in Europe. Fazıl Ahmed died in 1676, succeeded briefly by his foster brother Kara Mustafa Pasha. The disaster at Vienna and the Great Turkish War, 1683 to 1699. Kara Mustafa Pasha, ambitious and overconfident, persuaded Mehmed IV to launch a massive campaign against the Habsburgs in 1683. The pretext was Hungarian rebel Imre Thurkerli's appeal for aid against Leopold I. The Ottoman army, estimated at 150,000 to 200,000, including Tatar auxiliaries, besieged Vienna on July 14, 1683. Defended by Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg with 15,000 men, the city held desperately. Kara Mustafa rejected advice to storm immediately, opting for mining and bombardment while allowing supply lines to stretch. A relief army under King John III Sobieski of Poland arrived on September 12. In the largest cavalry charge in history, Polish winged hussars, the Christian coalition shattered the Ottoman lines at the Battle of Kahlenberg. Kara Mustafa fled, leaving immense stores and artillery. The defeat triggered the Holy League, Habsburgs, Poland, Venice, Papacy, later Russia. The subsequent Great Turkish War, 1683 to 1699, became the empire's greatest catastrophe since Timur's invasion. Key losses: Habsburg front, Prince Eugene of Savoy and Ludwig of Baden reconquered Hungary. Buda fell in 1686 after 145 years of Ottoman rule. The Battle of Mohacs, 1687, ironic reversal of 1526, saw Ottoman annihilation. By 1697, Eugene crushed the main army at Zenta, killing Grand Vizier Mustafa II personally on the battlefield. Venetian front, Francesco Morosini captured the Mora Peloponnese, 1685 to 1687, Athens, where a Venetian shell damaged the Parthenon, used as a powder magazine, and much of Dalmatia. Polish front, Sobieski regained Podolia. Russian front, Peter the Great's Azov campaigns, 1696, captured the fortress. The war ended with the Treaty of Karlowitz, January 26, 1699, mediated by England and Holland. Ottomans ceded Hungary, except Banat of Temesvar, Transylvania, Croatia, and Slavonia to Habsburgs. Mora to Venice. Podolia to Poland. Azov temporarily to Russia, formalized later. Karlowitz was the first Ottoman treaty acknowledging major territorial losses and negotiating as an equal rather than superior. It marked the beginning of the long retreat. Mustafa II and the Kurpulu decline, 1695 to 1703. Mehmed IV was deposed in 1687 after Vienna, succeeded by Suleiman II, 1687 to 1691, and Ahmed II, 1691 to 1695, weak rulers under Kerpurlu influence. Mustafa II, 1695 to 1703, attempted personal rule, leading campaigns but suffering Zenta. Frustrated Janissaries revolted in Istanbul in 1703, Edirne event, deposing Mustafa II and enthroning his brother Ahmed III. The Kerpurlu era effectively ended. No subsequent vizier family dominated so long. Ahmed III and the Tulip period, 1718 to 1730. Ahmed III's long reign, 1703 to 1730, began with recovery. Grand Vizier Sorlulu Ali Pasha and later Nevshehili Damed Ibrahim Pasha pursued cautious diplomacy. Russo-Turkish War, 1710 to 1711. Peter the Great's Pruth campaign against the Ottomans ended disastrously for Russia. Surrounded on the Pruth River, Peter accepted the Treaty of Pruth, 1711, return of Azov, demolition of Black Sea fortresses. Baltasai maimed Pasha's lenient terms, allegedly influenced by Catherine I's bribery, remain controversial. War with Venice and Habsburgs, 1714 to 1718. Ottomans recaptured the Mora in 1715 with minimal resistance. However, Habsburg intervention under Prince Eugene led to rapid defeats. Petrovaradin, 1716. Belgrade, 1717. The Treaty of Passarowitz, 1718, confirmed Mora's return but ceded Belgrade, Banat, and parts of Wallachia, Serbia to Austria, the last major Ottoman loss until the 19th century. The post-Passarowitz decade, 1718 to 1730, under Ibrahim Pasha became known as the Lail Devri Tulip period, a brief era of peace, Western influence, and cultural experimentation. Characteristics: architectural and cultural flourishing. Lavish palaces and kiosks along the Bosphorus, e.g., Sadabad Palace, modeled on Versailles. Tulip cultivation became a court obsession. Rare bulbs fetched astronomical prices. Western influences. First Ottoman printing press, 1727 by Ibrahim Mutafarika, publishing secular works with ulama approval. Yermaiski's maimed Celebes, 1720 to 1721, embassy to France inspired French-style gardens, fountains, and entertainment. Literary patronage. Poet Nedim captured the hedonistic spirit in verses celebrating pleasure, wine, and Istanbul's beauty. Painter Levny illustrated court life. Economic changes. Increased trade with Europe. Coffee houses proliferated as social hubs. Yet the Tulip period masked underlying tensions. Inflation persisted. Janissaries and conservative ulama resented westernization and extravagance. Heavy taxation to fund palaces burdened the populace. The Patrona Hallow Rebellion, 1730. In September 1730, discontent erupted. Patrona Halil, an Albanian ex-janissary turned bathhouse worker, led a mob of artisans, small traders, and janissaries. They seized Istanbul, demanding an end to luxury taxes and Western innovations. Ahmed III sacrificed Ibrahim Pasha, executed October 1, 1730, but could not stem the revolt. On October 1, he abdicated in favor of Mahmud I. Patrona Halil briefly dominated the city, but Mahmud lured him to palace negotiations and had him assassinated in November 1730. The rebellion was crushed, tulip gardens destroyed, and Sadabad razed. Social, economic, and military trends, 1656 to 1730. Military stagnation. The Janissary Corps, now hereditary and trade-oriented, resisted drill and firearms innovation. Artillery lagged behind European developments. The timber system decayed. Tax farming, iltizam, later malakane became permanent, enriching provincial iron at state expense. Economic shifts. Atlantic trade routes marginalized Ottoman ports. Capitulations expanded, giving European merchants extraterritorial privileges and low tariffs. Coffee, tobacco, and luxury goods flowed in. Silk and spice dominance waned. Intellectual life. Conservative ulama influence grew. Qadizadli Puritan movement peaked under Mehmed IV. Yet pragmatic scholars like Khatib Celebi, author of Sihanuma, and Mizan al-Haq, advocated rational inquiry and Western learning. Provincial power. Ayan families, e.g., Sapanoglu in Anatolia, Karyazmanoglu in Aegean became semi-autonomous, collecting taxes and maintaining private armies. Conclusion: a changed empire. The period 1656 to 1730 transformed the Ottoman Empire from offensive juggernaut to a state struggling to hold its frontiers. Karlowitz and Passarowitz formalized the new European balance of power, where Ottomans negotiated rather than dictated. The Tulip period offered a glimpse of potential modernization, cultural openness, diplomacy, technology, but its abrupt end revealed deep societal fractures. The 18th century would see cycles of reform attempts amid recurring wars with Russia and Austria, setting the stage for the defensive struggles of the empire's final centuries. Chapter 7: Wars with Russia, Early Reforms, and the Age of Mahmud II, 1730 to 1839. Mahmud I and Stabilization, 1730 to 1754. Mahmud I ascended amid the ashes of the Patrona Hallow Rebellion. His 24-year reign focused on recovery and cautious diplomacy rather than grand conquests. Key Grand Viziers included Topal Osman Pasha and Yegin Mehmed Pasha. Early challenges: suppression of lingering Janissary unrest and Ayan revolts in Anatolia and the Balkans. Major war: Russo-Austrian-Ottoman War, 1735 to 1739. Russia under Anna Ivanovna, allied with Habsburgs, sought Black Sea access. Initial Ottoman successes under Topal Osman victory at Banja Luka against Austria, 1737, were offset by Russian capture of Azov and incursions into Crimea. Habsburg defeats forced Austria to sue for peace separately. Treaty of Belgrade, 1739. Ottomans regained Belgrade and northern Serbia. Russia withdrew to the Don but retained Azov. The Belgrade Treaty, mediated by France, restored Ottoman prestige temporarily and confirmed French capitulations as allies against Russia and Austria. Domestic: rebuilding Istanbul after 1730 fires. Patronage of Baroque architecture, Nuri Osmaniye Mosque, begun 1748. Mahmud died in 1754. Osman III and Mustafa III, continued Russian pressure, 1754 to 1774. Osman III, 1754 to 1757, and Mustafa III, 1757 to 1774, ruled during escalating Russian ambition under Catherine the Great. Mustafa III attempted reforms, invited foreign military advisors, e.g., Baron de Tott, a French-Hungarian engineer, to modernize artillery and fortifications. Established the Imperial Naval Engineering School, Muhandishan-i Bar-i Humyan, 1773. Encouraged limited westernization in military dress and drill. War erupted in 1768. Russo-Turkish War, 1768 to 1774. Triggered by border incidents in Poland and Russian support for Polish Confederates. Ottoman declaration of war proved disastrous. Russian armies under Rumyantsev and Suvorov devastated Ottoman forces. Battle of Kardal Chesma equivalent on land, 1770. Destruction of the Ottoman fleet at Chesma, 1770, by Alexei Orlov. Over 90% of ships burned. Crimea occupied. Tatar Khanate declared independent under Russian protection. The Treaty of Kusuk-Kainarka, 1774, was catastrophic. Crimea independent, de facto Russian client by 1783 annexation. Russia gained Black Sea ports, Kerch, Yenikale and navigation rights. Ottomans paid massive indemnity. Russia claimed protectorate over Orthodox subjects, first foreign intervention in internal religious affairs. The treaty marked the beginning of the Eastern Question, European powers' involvement in Ottoman decline. Abdulhamid I and the annexation of Crimea, 1774 to 1789. Abdulhamid I inherited a weakened empire. Attempts to reform the army under Halil Hamid Pasha, Grand Vizier 1782 to 1785, included new barracks and European instructors, but Janissary resistance led to Hamid's execution. Wars. Brief conflict with Russia, 1787 to 1792, allied with Austria. Russian capture of Ochakov, 1788, Austrian advances in Serbia. Selim III, ascended in 1789 amid ongoing war. Selim III and the Nizami Saidid reforms, 1789 to 1807. Selim III, enlightened and reform-minded, initiated the most ambitious modernization since the Kurpulu era. Context. French Revolution, 1789, initially seen positively. Ottoman neutrality until Napoleon's 1798 Egyptian invasion. War with Russia-Austria continued until Treaty of Yassy, 1792, confirmed Kusuk Kainarka losses but no new cessions. Nizami Saidid, New Order. New European-style Army Corps, 1797 onward. Trained by French officers, uniformed in European fashion, paid regularly. New Treasury, Iradi Saidid, to fund it via confiscated timers and tax reforms. Permanent embassies in Europe, London, Paris, Vienna, Berlin. First time Ottomans maintained resident diplomats. Technical schools. Renewed Muhandishanai Berai Humyan, land engineering, 1795. Resistance. Janissaries viewed Nizam troops as existential threat. Ulama and provincial ayan feared centralization. Economic strain from wars. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, 1798 to 1801. Bonaparte invaded Egypt, defeating Mamluks at Pyramids, 1798. Ottoman declaration of war on France, alliance with Britain and Russia. British naval victory at Aboukir Bay, Nelson, 1798. Selim's forces retook Egypt with British aid, 1801, but Muhammad Ali, an Ottoman officer, emerged dominant sea below. Deposition of Selim III and the Russak Incident, 1807 to 1808. In 1806, renewed war with Russia. Janissaries refused to fight alongside Nizam troops. Kabaksi Mustafa rebellion in Istanbul, 1807, forced Selim to disband Nizami Saidid. He was deposed in May 1807, confined and later murdered, 1808. Mustafa IV, 1807 to 1808, conservative puppet, ruled briefly. Reformist Alemdar Mustafa Pasha Ayan of Russak marched on Istanbul 1808, enthroning Mahmud II and attempting to restore reforms. Janissaries revolted again, killing Alemdar. Mustafa IV executed. Mahmud II survived as sole ruler. Mahmud II, the early years and Janissary destruction, 1808 to 1826. Mahmud II, aged 23 at accession, played a long game. Outwardly cautious, he rebuilt central authority gradually. Wars. Russo-Turkish War, 1806 to 1812. Continued from Selim's reign. Russian victories in Balkans, Danube principalities occupied. Treaty of Bucharest, 1812. Ottomans ceded Bessarabia. Serbia gained autonomy under Miloš Obrenović. Serbian uprisings, 1804 to 1817. First, 1804 to 1813 under Karađorđe. Second, 1815 under Miloš. Resulted in de facto Serbian autonomy, confirmed 1830. Greek Revolution, 1821 to 1830. Began in Mora and islands. Philhellene European sympathy, Ottoman massacres, chaos 1822, and Greek atrocities fueled propaganda. Ibrahim Pasha, Muhammad Ali's son, nearly crushed revolt, 1825 to 1827. European intervention, Navarino Bay 1827. British, French, Russian fleets destroyed Ottoman Egyptian navy. Russian War, 1828 to 1829, devastated Balkans. Meanwhile, Egypt under Muhammad Ali. Albanian officer who seized power post 180, won French withdrawal. Modernized army with French advisors, massacred remaining Mamluks, 1811. Conquered Sudan, 1820 to 1822, developed cotton economy. The auspicious incident, destruction of the Janissaries, 1826. Mahmud prepared meticulously. Created new corps Eshkins, with European drill, 1826. Janissaries revolted June 15, 1826, barricading in Etmadani barracks. Loyal artillery bombarded barracks. Surviving Janissaries hunted down and executed Vakai Harii, auspicious incident. Consequences: Janissary Corps, abolished after 500 years. Bektashi Sufi order, Janissary spiritual allies suppressed. New army, Asakirai Manjurai Muhammadai, victorious soldiers of Mohammed, conscription-based European style. Later reforms and wars of Mahmud II, 1826 to 1839. Military reorganization. Uniforms, ranks, conscription modeled on Europe. Military, medical, and music schools. Administrative. Census 1831, first modern population count. Postal system, quarantine regulations. Official newspaper Takvimai Veki, 1831. Western dress mandated for officials, 1830s. War with Muhammad Ali, 1831 to 1833, 1839. Muhammad Ali demanded Syria for aid against Greeks. Son Ibrahim invaded 1831. Captured Acre, Damascus, defeated Ottomans at Konya 1832, advanced to Kütahya. Russian troops landed in Istanbul 1833 to prop Mahmud. Treaty of Kütahya granted Muhammad Ali Syria but not independence. Unkayar-Skelesi Treaty 1833 with Russia. Mutual defense, secret clause closing Dardanelles to foreign warships, Ottoman dependence on Russia. Second crisis, 1839. Mahmud restarted war. Ottoman army crushed at Nizip, June 1839 by Ibrahim. Mahmud died July 1, 1839, unaware of defeat. Ottoman fleet defected to Egypt. European powers intervened. London Convention 1840, forcing Muhammad Ali to retreat to hereditary Egypt. Society and culture. Decline of classical divan poetry, rise of folk literature. Continued Baroque Rococo architecture, Dalmabas beginnings under Mahmud. Growing Western influence, students sent to Europe, translations of technical works. Conclusion, Mahmud II's legacy. Mahmud II, often called the Peter the Great of Turkey, dismantled the old order. Eliminated Janissaries, the greatest obstacle to modernization. Centralized state apparatus. Laid foundations for Tanzimat reforms. Yet his reign ended in military humiliation, foreign intervention, and loss of effective control over Egypt. The empire survived but entered the 19th century as the sick man of Europe, dependent on European balance of power. Chapter 8. The Tanzimat Era, Reform, Reorganization and Rising Nationalism, 1839 to 1878. Abdul-Mejid I and the Proclamation of Tanzimat, 1839 to 1861. Abdul-Mejid I ascended the throne on July 1, 1839, hours after Mahmud II's death and the disastrous defeat at Nizib. At age 16, he inherited an empire on the brink. The army shattered, the fleet in Alexandria, Egypt in rebellion, and European powers dictating terms. The young sultan relied on experienced statesmen, chiefly Grand Vizier Mustafa Rashid Pasha, the architect of the new reform era. The Gulhane Hat Letter 131 Sheriff, Noble Edict of the Rose Chamber, November 3, 1839. Proclaimed in the imperial garden of Topkapi Palace, this document launched the Tanzimat reorganization, period, 1839 to 1876. Key promises: security of life, honor, and property for all subjects, Muslim and non-Muslim alike. Abolition of tax farming iltizam. Introduction of regular, proportional taxation. Fair and public trials. End to arbitrary execution and confiscation. Regular conscription and fixed-term military service for all communities. Equality before the law, regardless of religion. Though not a constitution, the edict marked a shift from traditional Islamic Ottoman governance towards secular, egalitarian principles influenced by European models. It aimed to strengthen the state by gaining loyalty of non-Muslim subjects and placating European critics of Ottoman despotism. Immediate challenges and European intervention, 1839 to 1841. Muhammad Ali's forces threatened Anatolia. Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, excluding France, Muhammad Ali's ally, imposed the London Convention, 1840. Muhammad Ali received hereditary rule over Egypt but withdrew from Syria, Palestine, and Arabia, returned the Ottoman fleet. Convention of the Straits, 1841, closed Dardanelles and Bosphorus to foreign warships in peacetime, ending Russian unilateral privilege. Crimean War, 1853 to 1856. Triggered by Russian demands for protectorate over Orthodox subjects, per Kusuk Kainarka. France and Britain allied with Ottomans to check Russian expansion. Battles: Sinop, Russian naval massacre 1853, Inkerman, Balaclava, siege of Sevastopol, fell 1855. Treaty of Paris, 1856. Ottoman integrity guaranteed by European powers. Black Sea demilitarized. Russia lost southern Bessarabia. Moldavia and Wallachia, future Romania, gained autonomy under collective guarantee. The war bankrupted the empire. First foreign loans, 1854, began a cycle of debt. Hat Letter 131 Humyan, Imperial Rescript, February 18, 1856. Issued under European pressure during Paris negotiations. Reaffirmed and expanded Gulhane. Full equality of all subjects in taxation, military service, education, justice, and public office. Allowed non-Muslims to serve in army or pay exemption tax. Mixed courts for cases involving different religions. Provincial councils with elected non-Muslim representatives. Implementation lagged. Conservative resistance and local prejudice limited real equality. Administrative reforms. Provincial reorganization. Vilayets provinces with governors, valleys, and elected councils 1860s. Land Code 1858. Attempted to register land, protect peasant rights, but often benefited notables. Secular education. Expansion of Rushdie secondary schools. First universities Darul Funan attempts. Telegraph network, steamships, railroads Izmiridan line begun 1856. Abdulaziz and extravagance amid reform, 1861 to 1876. Abdulaziz, brother of Abdulmejid, ruled with more personal authority. He traveled to Europe, 1867, first sultan to do so, visiting France, Britain, and Austria. Achievements: modern navy, world's third largest ironclad fleet by 1875. Istanbul's first tramway, 1871. Underground funicular tunnel, 1875. Galata Financial District, Ottoman Bank, 1863 as State Bank. But extravagance defined the reign. Lavish palaces. Dolmabahce completed 1856, occupied by Abdulaziz, Surregan, Beylerbey. Massive borrowing. Public debt rose from 8 million to over 200 million Ottoman pounds. Corruption in railroad concessions. Young Ottoman movement. Intellectual opposition. Namık Kemal Zia Pasha Ali Suavi. Influenced by French liberalism and Islamic modernism. Published newspapers Tasviri Efkar, Hurriyet in exile, advocating constitutionalism, patriotism, and reform within Islamic framework. Sought to limit sultanic power through parliament. Midhat Pasha and provincial modernization. As governor of Danube Vilayet, 1864 to 1868, Midhat created model administration, roads, schools, banks, newspapers. Later Baghdad governor, built infrastructure in Iraq. Financial crisis and deposition, 1875 to 1876. Debt service consumed over half the budget. In October 1875, the empire declared partial bankruptcy, paying only half interest. European bondholders formed the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, 1881, post-reign. Crisis-fueled unrest. Drought and famine in Anatolia, 1873 to 1875. Herzegovinian uprising, 1875, spread to Bosnia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro. Abdulaziz, blamed for financial ruin, was deposed May 30, 1876 by reformist statesman Midhat Pasha, Hussein Avni Pasha. Murad V succeeded but suffered mental breakdown after 3 months. Abdulaziz died days later, officially suicide, widely believed murder. Abdulhamid II and the First Constitutional Era, 1876 to 1878. Abdulhamid II ascended December 1876, amid war with Serbia, Montenegro, and Bulgarian crisis. Bulgarian atrocities, 1876. Brutal suppression of April uprising. Bashibazok massacres killed thousands. European outrage, Gladstone's pamphlet. Russia declared war April 1877. Russo-Turkish War, 1877 to 1878. Russian armies crossed Danube, captured Plevna after epic siege, Osman Pasha's defense. Advanced to San Stefano near Istanbul, March 1878 treaty. Big Bulgaria as Russian satellite. Independence for Serbia, Montenegro, Romania. Autonomy for Bosnia. Massive indemnity. Congress of Berlin, June to July 1878, Bismarck host. Reduced Bulgaria to autonomous principality north of Balkans. Eastern Rumelia autonomous under Ottoman suzerainty. Austria occupied Bosnia-Herzegovina. Britain received Cyprus, secret agreement for defending Ottoman Asia. Russia gained southern Bessarabia, Kars, Batum, Ardahan. First Ottoman Constitution, Kanuni Sasi, December 23, 1876. Drafted by Midhat Pasha and Commission. Proclaimed amid war to forestall European intervention. Bicameral Parliament, appointed Senate, elected Chamber of Deputies. Civil rights, ministerial responsibility, judicial independence. Sultan retained vast powers, dissolve parliament, veto laws, rule by decree. First elections, 1877, diverse deputies including Greeks, Armenians, Jews. Parliament met March 1877, debated war vigorously. Abdulhamid prorogued it February 1878 after Russian advance, never reconvening it during his reign. Midhat Pasha exiled, later murdered 1884. Society and culture in the Tanzimat era. Secularization. Nizamiya, secular, courts alongside Sharia, 1869 to 1876 Penal Code based on French model. Education, expansion of girls' schools, teacher training colleges. Press, growth of newspapers, over 100 by 1870s. Ottoman Turkish simplified. Literature, novel emerges Namık Kemal's Vatan Yahut Silister, theater. Non-Muslim communities. Millets reorganized with lay councils, 1860s. Economic rise. Greek, Armenian, Jewish bankers and merchants prominent. But rising nationalism. Bulgarian Exarchate, 1870 split from Patriarchate. Armenian question emerges. Berlin Treaty Article 61 promised reforms in eastern provinces. Armenian intellectuals sought European pressure for autonomy. Economic developments. Capitulations expanded. European merchants gained further privileges. Railroads, 2,000 km by 1876, mostly foreign-owned. Free trade. 1838 Anglo-Ottoman Treaty lowered tariffs, local industry stifled. Foreign debt, from zero in 1853 to crippling levels. Conclusion, Tanzimat's mixed legacy. The Tanzimat era fundamentally reshaped the Ottoman state. Shift toward secular, centralized, egalitarian governance. Infrastructure and administrative modernization. Integration into European diplomatic and economic systems. Yet achievements were partial. Equality remained more legal than real. Reforms alienated conservatives without fully satisfying nationalists. Financial dependence grew, military weakness exposed. Rising ethnic nationalism in Balkans and Anatolia foreshadowed disintegration. By 1878, the empire had lost effective control over much of the Balkans and faced mounting internal pressures. Abdülhamid II's long autocratic reign would attempt pan-Islamic consolidation amid accelerating decline. Chapter 9. Abdülhamid II, the Young Turks and the Dissolution of the Empire, 1878 to 1922. Abdülhamid II's autocratic rule and pan-Islamism, 1878 to 1909. Abdülhamid II, ascending amid the Russo-Turkish War's aftermath and the Congress of Berlin, ruled for 33 years with a blend of paranoia, conservatism, and pragmatic modernization. Having prorogued the 1877 Parliament in 1878, he governed as an absolute monarch, justifying suspension as necessary during crisis. Centralized control and surveillance. Expanded palace secretariat Mabon and intelligence network, Yıldız İstihbarat. Censorship, press tightly controlled, Hamida censorship offices scrutinized publications. Exile or imprisonment for dissidents, e.g., Midhat Pasha's trial and murder in Taif, 1884. Pan-Islamic policy emphasized caliphate to rally Muslim subjects against European imperialism and nationalist separatism. Hijaz Railway, 1900 to 1908, funded largely by Muslim donations worldwide, connecting Damascus to Medina, Mecca branch unfinished, symbolized unity and facilitated pilgrimage military transport. Outreach to Indian Muslims, Central Asia and Indonesia against British, Dutch, Russian rule. Modernization paradox. Despite autocracy, Abdülhamid advanced infrastructure and education. Railroads, expanded to 6,000 km, including Baghdad Railway, German concession, begun 1888, reached Konya 1896. Education, multiplied primary, Sibian to Ibtidai and secondary schools, professional institutions, law, medicine, civil service. Hijri calendar retained, but Gregorian widely used in administration. Military, German advisors von der Goltz reorganized army, new artillery and Krupp guns. Armenian question and massacres. Berlin Treaty Article 61 required reforms in eastern Anatolia. Armenian revolutionary groups, Hunchaks 1887, Dashnaks 1890, demanded autonomy. Hamida cavalry, Kurdish irregulars, 1891, intended to counter Russian influence but often terrorized Armenians. Sasun Rebellion 1894 and subsequent massacres. Bank Ottoman occupation in Istanbul 1896 led to widespread killings in capital. 1894 to 1896 massacres estimates 100,000 to 300,000 Armenian deaths. European outrage but no intervention. Macedonian crisis and great power rivalry. Macedonian question. Bulgarian, Greek, Serbian bands fought for influence. IMRO, Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, active. Austro-Russian Muetsteg Agreement, 1903, imposed European gendarmerie reforms. British naval demonstration at Mytilene, 1905, forced customs concessions. Foreign policy in Yemen. Maintained uneasy balance. German alliance deepened. Kaiser Wilhelm II's 1898 Damascus visit. Reasserted control in Yemen against Zaydi imams. Costly frontier wars. The Young Turk Revolution and Second Constitutional Era, 1908 to 1909. Opposition coalesced in the Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, Ittihad v Tariki, founded 1889 in Military Medical Academy, reorganized in Salonika 1906. 1908 Revolution. Niazi Bey and Enver Bey's rescript troops mutiny in Macedonia, July 1908. Abdulhamid restored 1876 Constitution, July 23, to preempt wider revolt. Elections produced multi-ethnic parliament opening December 1908. Counter-revolution and deposition, 1909. Conservative Islamist revolt in Istanbul, April 13, 1909. 31 March incident in Rumi calendar. Action Army, Hareket Ordusu, from Salonika under Mahmud Shevket Pasha crushed rebellion. Parliament deposed Abdulhamid April 27, 1909. Exiled to Salonika, later Beylerbeyi Palace. Maimed 5 Rishad, elderly and compliant, enthroned. Cup dominance and wars of disintegration, 1909 to 1914. Cup consolidated power through 1912, sidelining liberals, RR/Hurriyet v Itilaf. Political developments. 1912, election of clubs, Sopali Sesam, Cup intimidation secured majority. 1913 Babletter 131 Ali coup. Cup leaders Enver Talat, Semel, stormed Sublime Port, killing War Minister Nazim Pasha. Kemal Pasha resigned. Territorial losses. Bosnian crisis, 1908. Austria formally annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina. Bulgaria declared full independence. Italo-Turkish War 1911 to 1912. Italy invaded Libya, Trablusgarp. Ottoman resistance, Enver Mustafa Kemal heroic but futile. Treaty of Auchi, Libya ceded. Dodecanese islands occupied temporarily. Balkan Wars 1912 to 1913. First Balkan War. Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, Montenegro allied. Ottomans defeated at Lüleburgaz, Kirklarely, Edirne, and most European territory lost. Treaty of London, 1913. Ottomans retained only eastern Thrace. Second Balkan War. Allies quarreled. Ottomans recaptured Edirne and Enver's coup de main. Treaty of Bucharest, 1913. Confirmed massive losses. Albania independent. Empire reduced to Anatolia, eastern Thrace, Arab provinces. World War I and the Ottoman collapse, 1914 to 1918. Entry into war. Secret Ottoman-German alliance, August 2, 1914. Goban and Breslau renamed Yavuz and Midilli, sheltered in Istanbul. Black Sea bombardment, October 1914, precipitated war with Entente. Major fronts: Caucasus, 1914 to 1917, Enver's Sarikamish disaster, winter 1914 to 1915, 90,000 Ottoman troops froze and starved. Gallipoli, 1915 to 1916, Allied attempt to force Dardanelles, Ottoman victory under Mustafa Kemal, Anzac Cove, Chunuk Bair, 250,000 total casualties. Mesopotamia, Kut al-Amara siege, 1915 to 1916, Townshend surrender, British recapture Baghdad, 1917. Palestine Sinai, Suez Canal attack failed, 1915, Beersheba Gaza defeats, 1917, Jerusalem lost December 1917, Damascus October 1918, Arab Revolt, 1916 to 1918, Sharif Hussein of Mecca, encouraged by Britain, McMahon-Hussein correspondence, Sykes-Picot secret agreement, T.E. Lawrence and Faisal's forces harassed Hijaz Railway. Armenian genocide, 1915 to 1917. Cup leaders Talat, Enver, Semel, ordered deportation of Armenian population from eastern Anatolia, citing security. Death marches, massacres by special organization, Teshkilat Letter 131 Masusa and local forces. Scholarly consensus, 800,000 to 1.5 million deaths, recognized as genocide by most historians and many states. Home front collapse. Economic blockade, requisitioning, corruption caused famine. Population displacement, sectarian violence. Armistice of Mudros, October 30, 1918. Signed aboard HMS Agamemnon, Ottoman armies demobilized. Allies occupied straits, railways, key cities. Occupation, resistance, and the Turkish War of Independence, 1918 to 1923. Partition plans. Sykes-Picot 1916, Treaty of Sevres 1920. Anatolia divided among allies, Greece, Smyrna Zone, Armenia, Kurdistan, Straits internationalized. Nationalist resistance. Mustafa Kemal Pasha landed Samsun May 19, 1919, official start of Independence War. Congresses, Erzurum July, Sivas September declared National Pact, Misak Letter 131 Milli. Grand National Assembly opened Ankara April 23, 1920. Regular Army reformed under Kazım Karabekir, İsmet İnönü. Major campaigns. Eastern Front, Karabekir defeated Armenian Republic, Treaty of Alexandropol/Gumru 1920. Western Front, Greek offensive from Smyrna 1919 to 1921. Turkish victories at 1st and 2nd Inurnu 1921. Sakarya Battle, August to September 1921. Kemal's defensive masterpiece, Greeks exhausted. Great Offensive, August 26 to September 9, 1922. Dumlupinar victory, Greek retreat. Smyrna fire, September 1922. Armistice of Mudanya, October 11, 1922. Greeks evacuated eastern Thrace. Abolition of Sultanate. Grand National Assembly abolished Sultanate November 1, 1922. Maimed 6 Vahidin fled on British warship November 17. Caliphate retained under Abdülmecid Efendi. Treaty of Lausanne, July 24, 1923. Negotiated by İsmet İnönü. Recognized Republic of Turkey's sovereignty within modern borders, except Mosul, awarded to Iraq 1926. Population exchange. 1.2 million Greeks from Turkey, 400,000 Muslims from Greece. Capitulations abolished, Straits demilitarized. Epilogue. End of empire. The Ottoman Empire formally ended with the Sultanate's abolition. The Caliphate was abolished March 3, 1924, completing secular transition. Legacy. Multi-ethnic, multi-religious state lasted over 6 centuries. Bridged medieval and modern worlds. Influenced law, architecture, cuisine across 3 continents. Collapse shaped modern Middle East mandates, borders, and Balkans. Turkish Republic emerged from ashes, pursuing radical secular modernization under Ataturk.